When a person consistently avoids social events, it is tempting to label this as shyness, weakness, or even arrogance. But psychologically, avoidance is rarely a defect. It is far more often a form of protection. The nervous system remembers. It remembers moments of judgment, rejection, emotional overwhelm, or the pressure to perform a role that felt foreign to the true self. Over time, the psyche learns to associate social environments with danger, not physical danger, but the subtler threat of psychological exposure. Withdrawal then becomes an unconscious strategy to preserve inner stability. In Jungian terms, the ego retreats not because it is incapable, but because it senses that it is not yet sufficiently integrated to face the collective without losing itself. What looks like isolation is often the soul drawing its boundaries, saying, "I need safety before I can offer presence." This reframes avoidance as intelligence, not failure. The task, then, is not to force oneself into crowds, but to understand what part of the self is still seeking security and recognition. Only when that inner need is met does the fear of the outer world begin to loosen. The way forward is not pressure, but awareness. And awareness is always the beginning of freedom. Many who avoid social gatherings are not indifferent to people. In fact, they are often too aware of them. Their psyche is unusually sensitive to emotional currents, unspoken tensions, and subtle shifts in mood. What passes unnoticed by others is registered instantly in their nervous system. A crowded room is therefore not just a room, but a field of competing energies, expectations, and unexpressed feelings. Small talk, which for some is a pleasant ritual, can feel like a continuous demand to process, signals that carry little depth, yet require constant adaptation. The mind becomes fatigued not from conversation itself, but from the effort of filtering, interpreting, and containing what is emotionally present, but rarely spoken. In Jungian terms, such individuals live close to the threshold of the unconscious, where impressions are felt before they are named. Their withdrawal is not a rejection of humanity, but a response to overstimulation. The psyche seeks silence in order to regain coherence, just as the body seeks rest after exertion. This sensitivity, if understood, becomes a source of insight rather than isolation. The question is not how to become less sensitive, but how to learn to stand within one's sensitivity without being overwhelmed by it. What you learn to hold without fleeing becomes the very ground of your inner strength. For many who avoid social events, the issue is not fear of people, but a deep discomfort with inauthenticity. They sense, often intuitively, when interaction is governed by masks, roles, and social performances rather than genuine presence. In such settings, the self is subtly asked to fragment, to present a version that is acceptable, amusing, agreeable, rather than true. The psyche experiences this as a small betrayal repeated many times. Over time, it learns to associate gatherings with inner division, one part speaking, another observing, a third quietly withdrawing. Jung would say that when the persona becomes too dominant, the soul resists. It does not wish to live only on the surface. These individuals long for encounters in which something real is exchanged, where words carry meaning and silence carries understanding. When that depth is absent, the inner world retreats, not out of superiority, but out of a refusal to live falsely. Avoidance then becomes a protest of the authentic self against a culture of superficial connection. The task is not to abandon society, but to find or create spaces where truth is permitted to appear, where you no longer have to perform. Your energy returns, your voice softens, and your presence becomes whole. Authenticity is not a luxury of the strong, it is the psychological necessity of the soul. Behind the quiet decision to stay away from gatherings, there is often a memory the mind no longer consciously visits, yet the body still remembers. An early moment of ridicule, exclusion, or emotional exposure can leave a deep imprint on the unconscious. The psyche learns its lesson quickly. Visibility can be dangerous. Openness can invite pain. Long after the event itself has faded, its emotional echo remains, shaping behavior from the shadows. In Jungian terms, such experiences form a complex, a knot of feeling and meaning that is activated whenever a similar situation arises. A room full of people does not feel like a present reality. It feels like a return to an old wound. The adult may know rationally that the threat is gone, but the nervous system responds as if it was still there. Avoidance then becomes a form of time travel, an attempt to prevent the past from repeating itself. Yet what is unexamined does not dissolve, it only governs from below. The task is not to deny the wound, nor to force oneself into exposure, but to bring conscious understanding to what was once endured in silence. When a memory is met with awareness, it loses its power to dictate the future. What you dare to face within yourself can no longer silently decide how you live. At the core of social avoidance lies a quiet inner tension between two fundamental human needs, the need to belong and the need to remain oneself. Every psyche seeks connection, yet it also seeks integrity. For some, the collective atmosphere of social settings feels as though it demands conformity at the cost of individuality. Opinions must be softened, emotions adjusted, identity subtly reshaped to fit the unspoken rules of the group. Jung described this as the pressure of the collective psyche upon the process of individuation. The individual feels pulled to dissolve into what is expected, while another part of the self resists, fearing the loss of its inner truth. This conflict is exhausting. It creates a sense that to be with others, one must abandon something essential within. Avoidance then becomes a way of protecting the fragile process of becoming who one truly is. It is not rejection of community, but a hesitation to sacrifice authenticity for acceptance. The soul is asking a profound question. How can I belong without betraying myself? Until that question finds an answer, withdrawal feels safer than participation. The work is to strengthen the inner center so that presence no longer requires self-erasure. When you stand firmly in who you are, belonging no longer threatens your individuality. It reveals it. Ultimately, the avoidance of social events is not a problem of society. It is a message from the inner world. It points to parts of the psyche that have not yet been reconciled, emotions that have not yet found a safe place to be expressed, and identities that are still seeking coherence. In Jungian terms, it signals a lack of integration between the conscious persona and the deeper layers of the self. When these parts are in conflict, the outer world feels threatening because the inner world is divided. One cannot stand comfortably among others while standing uncomfortably with oneself. Withdrawal, then, is an attempt to protect what is still fragile, to guard an inner structure that has not yet become whole. But integration does not happen in isolation alone. It requires awareness, reflection, and the courage to meet what has been avoided within. As the self becomes more unified, the world no longer feels like an invasion, but an extension of life itself. Social fear softens not because people change, but because the inner ground becomes stable. The task is to listen to what avoidance is trying to teach, rather than merely fighting it. When you make peace with your inner divisions, the outer world loses its power to frighten you. Wholeness is the point at which presence no longer feels like danger, but like home.